everyone, I'm here today to do my November wrap-up. It's almost the end of the year, it has gone very fast. But yeah, let's start first with some statistics. So in November I have read 7 books, and that counts up to 2,385 pages, which is not quite a lot. It's like fairly average for me these days, but I'm quite impressed because this month was pretty crazy in terms of works and stuff. Moods, most of it is reflective and informative. That's because it's non-fiction November, and most of the books that I have read were non-fiction, as we will see later. Also challenging is a chunk, and then inspired and hopeful, which is normally not the case for my books. But yeah, I guess that's what it is for this month. In terms of pace, 43% of them were slow and 57 medium, which is, I think, normal for me. In terms of page number, again, 43 of them were less than 300 pages, and 57 of them were between 300 and 499, so I haven't read any really big books this month. But yeah, most of them were around the 300 page area, which also again is normal for me. And as I said, most of the things I've read this month are non-fiction, 83%, so I have only read 1 fiction book this month. That is partly because of non-fiction November, and also partly because of Read Around the World project. Also, I'm reading quite a lot of non-fiction there in this part of the world that I am focusing on now, just because that's easier to find sometimes. And then in terms of genre, I have read 2 science books, 2 memoirs, 2 history, and then nature, feminism, young adult, literary, historical, food and drink, and essays. I didn't know that food and drink was a genre, but apparently it is. But yeah, that also clocks with the fact that I have read a lot of non-fiction, and I am often interested in science and nature non-fiction, so that's kind of reflected here as well. In terms of format, I have read 43% digital and 57% print, which I'm very happy with as well. I think it's the first month in a really long time in which print is bigger than digital, so that's something I'm very happy with. And actually, I only have 3 digital books left in my books app, and when I finish those, I think I'm trying to. It sounds weird to say because most people are trying to buy less books, but I'm trying to buy more books and get less books in ebook in different platforms. So yeah, this is good for me. And then languages, I have read 1 book in Spanish and the rest of them in English. And finally, if you look at the pages in November, as I said, it was actually a pretty busy month at work, so I have had a few peaks here and there, mostly on weekends and then at the very end of the month, because I was trying to finish things. And also, I mean, these peaks are interesting because whenever you finish a non-fiction book, like, it counts all of the notes and references part of it normally in the page count, but I have not read those, so those peaks also might correspond to me finishing a book, and the app counting like the 100 pages of references as read as well, which I haven't. So yeah, anyway, that's for the stats of this month. If we look into the books themselves, the first book that I finished this month is An Inventory of Losses by Judith Schalansky, which was a book of essays that I have been wanting to read for a while, and they're based on like people and places and things that have been kind of forgotten. And I thought the writing was very good, but I think the idea, like the execution of the idea, was not always as memorable as I would have liked it to be. It doesn't. I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but yeah, it's not a overly memorable book for me. So, in that sense, it was okay. The next book I read was Mr. Pip by Lloyd, and I took this as my book for Papua New Guinea because it's set there, but it's written by a white New Zealand man. And it's about this girl that lives in a village, and they have this conflict with the rebels in the community, and they like how that like fight disturbs the community. It has a very white savior tone to it, and I didn't enjoy that. The reading experience, like the story and the way, like the narrative, is good, but I didn't enjoy the white savior trope, and I didn't enjoy the like superiority that comes from it. Like, yeah, I had issues with it. The next book I read was Black Milk by Elif Shafak, and this is a memoir on like the conflict of her becoming a mother and getting married and all of that, when she always thought that she was going to be a single woman writer and put all her energy into her writing. And she talks about it in a kind of magical realism way. So she talks about these little women that live inside her, and they have different ambitions. So it's like the spiritual side of her, the ambitious side of her, the perfectionist side of her, and then the unexpected motherly side of her, and the like love-oriented side of her that she didn't know that she had, and kind of like the inner fights, and she puts it in a very magical way. I enjoyed it. I think that's putting it in that way is probably doesn't come across as very honest, but it was enjoyable, and I think it was a kind of a different way to do things, and maybe for her was also easier to write that way so that she doesn't feel as involved. And I also recognize a lot of those fights of what society expects from a woman being married and having kids, and you not wanting to fit into that but still end up married and having kids, and how kind of like you justify that to yourself in a way. So yeah, I like those conversations and I enjoyed the book overall. The next book I finished was The Years or Los Años by Annie Ernaux, and this is kind of yeah, it's difficult to describe. It's a non-fiction, going kind of like through the years of her life from I think like the 50s or the 60s until recently, like 2008 I think this was written. And it's yeah, it basically talks about like the main events of each year and how society evolved and how she evolved with society. I thought it was well written, as Annie Ernaux normally is, but it was so fragmented and it was so snapshotty that you didn't spend enough time with any of the things that happened to care about them, and it relied a lot on you remembering those facts as well. So for example, when we got to like 9/11 or something like that, which I have also lived through, then it was like, oh, okay, I recognize myself, ha ha ha. But the other parts are, I didn't recognize a lot of the things that happen. And even though I agree with the sentiments that she often expresses about those events and about how society is and how it should be, I think that it just doesn't click the same way when they're talking about something that you didn't live through as if you lived through it. So yeah, I think that's something that I struggle with Annie Ernaux in general, and this is my second Annie Ernaux, and I always feel like that was very well written and that was expressing things that I also agree with very well, but I just don't need to read more of her. The next book that I read was Meteorites, Ice and Antarctica, a personal account by Robert Cassidy. And this is, as I said, it says a personal account of Robert Cassidy, who studied meteorites for most of his life, and a big part of that was in Antarctica. So apparently there is an unusual amount of meteorites in Antarctica, and there's a lot of people working on collecting a lot of them and collecting the data of them so that we can understand a little bit more about them, but also about where they come from, about why they are in the place they are, stuff like that. And so it's kind of divided in 3 parts. The first part is about his personal account of living in Antarctica and how far it is and how cold it is, but how exciting it is and how beautiful, and all of these things about Antarctica that are very fun to talk about, because not a lot of people have been in Antarctica, and they shouldn't. That's the whole point. And a little bit kind of like the politics of being in Antarctica, and I really enjoyed that part. And then the second and third part, he talks more about his passion, which is meteorites, and you can feel the passion, and I think that as a non-fiction it's quite well written in the sense that it's quite approachable, but I'm not that interested in meteorites. And the third part is a little bit more interesting because it actually explains the relevance of the studies he was doing, because in the second part it's just like, this is all the meteorites we found, and then in the third part he explains a little bit, okay, so that means that this comes from the moon, so that tells us certain things about the moon. This comes from Mars, which tells us certain things about Mars, and all these kind of things. And that was a little bit more interesting, but yeah, it was the sciencey part of it was a bit too niche. Like, I don't think there are like that many people that are interested on the classification of the different types of meteorites, but the part of Antarctica was quite fun, and that's why I read it. I read it for the Read Around the World project for Antarctica, and because there is no, in principle, there is no one that has been born in Antarctica. It has to be a outside person, and this was the book that I found. So yeah, that's why I read it, and I enjoyed parts of it. The next book that I read was again for Nonfiction November, and that was Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino. I have heard really good things about this in BookTube, and they are all justified. This is a really, really good book. So it goes through, it's divided in parts, and each part is kind of like a different type of food. So you have like wild foods, cereals, vegetables, meat, fish, fruits, cheese, stuff like that. And he talks about one type of food from a certain part of the world that is almost extinct, and why is it going extinct, and why is it important to not let it go extinct. And what is important about the biodiversity of not only the wild part of things, but also the things that we plant, and how that makes it more resilient to pests, more resilient to climate change or whatever, and the politics of all of that. And some of the chapters were really about those foods that he was talking about, and some of the chapters were more about the bigger picture and the consequences of losing biodiversity. And I really enjoyed it. Like, it was very well written, it was very rigorous, but at the same time very engaging, and it made me really hungry. And I want to try most of the things. I mean, I'm vegan, so I cannot really try all of the things, but it made me want to try a lot of the things he was talking about, because they sounded really, really special. And that also, in the introduction, he was talking about the fact that now we think that we have more diverse food than ever, because we can have sushi, we can have like Indian food, we can have Indonesian food, we can have African food, we can have whatever. But actually, if you think about it, yes, but also those things are the same everywhere. Like, if you go to a different country, it's probably going to have like the same mix of variety that we have here. And he's talking about, actually, true diversity means that every single place has its own huge array of different foods, and there should be so much more diversity. Diversity is not taking something from somewhere else and bringing it to your table. It's more about what you grow in your own area being more diverse. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's brilliant. So yeah, I would highly recommend. And then the last book that I read this month is An Immense World by Yong, which is, I thought it was gonna be kind of in like the same vein. They were talked about as very good non-fictions that have been recently published, and this was very good as well. This is, I thought it was going to be more of a like going through different animals and like discussing how they're connected, and this kind of is, but it's more about the senses. So we assume we have five. We probably have more, and there are animals that have more and they perceive the world differently. Like even if we talk about our smell versus a dog's smell, or like our vision versus other animals' vision, it is very different, and it doesn't mean that it's better or worse for anyone. It just like we have evolved in different directions and we have focused in different senses that we have or not have, and there's of course animals that have the sense to sense magnetic waves, or the sense to sense currents of air, or like ultrasound stuff. So there's like other senses that we cannot really comprehend that other animals have, and of course like he uses animals to explain those points, but it's more about the senses themselves and about the specific animals. There was this moment when he was talking about vision. He would talk about the fact that bees only see like up to yellow, they don't see red. So for them red is not red, is infra yellow, the same way that we talk about infrared, and then other animals can see infrared, so for them like there is another color that it's further away from. And I just thought that was like a little bit of very interesting science and things that I never thought about. But yeah, bees don't see infra yellow. Probably that comes because like I'm into like my research has a lot to do with light, so we are talking about UV and infrared and red and green and yellow light all the time. It's also very relevant because of course we are, and he also talks about it, we do affect other animals without knowing, because we don't realize like how much certain things that we do, like ultrasounds or like very bright lights or the UV of our screens or whatever, how much that affects other animals and how much it distorts their environment. And that's just because we are so wrapped up in ourselves that we cannot really have the empathy to think that they do perceive things in a very, very fundamental different way, and how important it is to do that, to make that step. We're never going to understand how they feel, but to make that step, to at least try, and try to disturb them less. It's a bit like, I mean, I'm not saying that this is in any way comparable, but like, you know how you go around your day and you maybe see a handicapped person that is not able, like, I don't know, a blind person that cannot cross the street because they don't have the right lines, or a wheelchair person that doesn't have the right accessibility to certain things, and how much more difficult the life is for them just because we are very abled and ableist, and we are like putting those barriers for them. And we're doing the same for animals without noticing most of the times. I don't think we are even trying to like make them like have a worse environment. We just don't realize, and I think that's why this is very, very interesting and very important, and I enjoyed it. I have to say that the only gripe that I have with this book is that Yong was clearly conscious of a non-scientific audience, and he was trying to make things relatable in a way that was a bit cringy to me sometimes. Like he was using too many metaphors and he was trying to make too many jokes for my liking, just so that he will try to engage people, assuming that what he was saying was not interesting enough in itself. So that was the only thing that I didn't like about this book, but I learned a lot, and I appreciate all the research and all the science that went into it, and yeah, I'm quite happy that I read it. Anyway, those are all the books that I read for this month. I think it was a pretty successful month, especially with nonfiction November. Let me know what you read this month, if you have read any of these books, if you have enjoyed any of these books, and until next video, bye!